start to identify how these proteins cycle.
And estimated that by the middle of the century,
actually makes your stress hormones go down faster.
Welcome to Brainwaves, a podcast about big ideas, produced at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm Lisa Marshall. This week, we're talking about turning back the clock on aging. As far back as the 15th century, Ponce de Leon was rumored to have discovered a fountain of youth whose magic waters could restore vigor and extend life. In the 2000s, anti-aging clinics began hawking pills and potions and some questionable promises to aging Americans. But now, some real-world science is beginning to show there really are things we can do to live longer and better. Here to talk about this is Professor Doug Seals of the Integrative Physiology of Aging Lab at CU Boulder. Welcome, Doug.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
There was a time not so long ago when that term anti-aging really raised eyebrows and drew a lot of skepticism. Can you talk a little bit about how what you study is different than that and how the field is evolving?
Yeah, I think the term anti-aging does have some negative connotations, and that's because there has been a history of medical clinics popping up here and there, especially in Florida and other places, that are really scams to try to get older adults to take various types of medical supplements or drugs. In the case of aging men, they often try to push growth hormone supplements and testosterone. And so that is not a name that typically folks in the science area are using and trying to sort of distance their work from.
So what is the field of longevity research really looking at? What is the objective?
I think the objective initially of the field was to understand the basic biological mechanisms of aging. Why does aging occur? What are the cellular and molecular events that are going on in our tissues and our organs that lead to the aging of those organs, the aging of the whole body? And the first focus of application, I think, was on longevity. Can we make animals or people live longer by understanding those basic mechanisms of aging? And now it's switched. Much of the focus now is on something called health span. So not like lifespan, where you're just talking about how long an animal or a person lives, but now how much of that life is spent in a state of good health and function.
One thing I see in the news all the time, and I see very well done studies about this, is this notion that sharply restricting calories or calorie restriction can do this. Can you talk a little bit about the science behind that?
Yeah, calorie restriction is something that's been studied for about a century in various types of research and eventually became kind of a hallmark of research on the biology of aging. And basically what early investigators and more recent studies have found is that for many types of animals, if you restrict their calories, say by 10 to 40% from what they would normally eat, what we call ad libitum eating, and you still make sure they're getting the essential nutrients. So it's caloric restriction, but without malnutrition. And so there's a lot of literature suggesting that caloric restriction is the only lifestyle intervention that can actually increase what they call maximal lifespan. And now, as I said, they're asking if animals and people can live longer with higher function in the caloric restricted state, and there's good evidence that that's also the case.
Are people actually doing this right now?
So a very small number of people are engaging in chronic voluntary caloric restriction. I don't know the exact numbers. It may be as low as a few thousand across the world. And the reason is because it's a very difficult thing to do. Sometimes these voluntary caloric restriction people don't look very healthy. Many have told me they don't feel very healthy. But this practice is based upon the sizable amount of data that we have that I was referring to on rodents and even non-human primates that suggests that you might get longevity and or health span extending benefits from caloric restriction.
It sounds like there are definitely some downsides to caloric restriction if you're talking about cutting your calories by 30 or 40%, especially if you're already of a normal weight. So is there something else you can do?
Yeah, so I think, caloric restriction is debatable for older adults who are maybe overweight or obese. It's an option. But as you mentioned, for normal weight older adults, the problem is that caloric restriction can reduce bone density, can reduce muscle mass, and can have other effects, say, on the immune system that really make it an unlikely answer at the public health level. So what we've been doing is studying caloric restriction mimetics or caloric restriction inspired types of interventions. And these are interventions that we hope may activate the same cellular and molecular pathways in our body that lead to the benefits of caloric restriction, but without some of the side effects. So there are other lifestyle practices like regular exercise that in many cases has caloric restriction-like benefits in terms of extending health span. But there are other approaches to try to simulate caloric restriction. One is a behavioral type of intervention called intermittent fasting. And this is, you may have read popular press books where it's the every other day diet, the every other day fasting in that case. Or there's the 5-2 diet where you fast 2 days a week and eat normally 5 days a week. And then the third kind of intermittent fasting that again is trying to mimic the effects of sustained caloric restriction is something called time-restricted feeding. And here the strategy is just to have you eat within an 8-hour period a day, and then you're fasting for the other 16 hours a day, with the idea that that extended fasting period is going to induce caloric restriction-like benefits. And then there's a group of compounds that you can take orally, sometimes referred to as nutraceuticals or dietary supplements. And again, the hope there is that those chemicals, those substances that you're taking are going to activate these caloric restriction pathways in the body.
So we just have about a minute left. What is your hope? Where is this going? In 5 years from now, am I going to be able to look 20 when I'm 50 or live forever? Or really, what is your hope?
Yeah, the main hope, I think, from people doing, so-called healthy aging research is extending health span. So we want people to live long lives, which we're essentially doing now. But we want them to live those lives without disability, without chronic disease.
Thanks for joining us, Doug. That was Doug Seals, director of CU's Integrative Physiology of Aging Lab. Doug recently got a $2 million 5-year grant from the National Institute of Aging to study a dietary supplement called nicotinamide riboside, which has been shown to have similar impacts in the body as calorie restriction. We'll look forward to hearing about those results later. But now on to Dirk Martin to talk about how the key to a youthful heart may actually lie in your gut.
As we age, our risk for cardiovascular disease increases due to our blood vessels stiffening. The solution to this problem, it lives in your gut.
So this study, for the first time, establishes a link between adverse changes in the gut microbiome and changes that occur to the arteries as we age, which can then increase the likelihood of developing cardiovascular diseases.
That's Vienna Brunt, the lead author of a CU Boulder study that showed a link between the microbiome that live in your gut and your risk of developing cardiovascular disease when you age.
We showed for the first time in a controlled setting that there are changes that happen with the gut microbiome with aging that are consistent with a dysbiotic or an adverse state. So increased prevalence of microbes that are pro-inflammatory and have been previously associated with diseases.
Brunt used old mice and young mice to discover this link. All of the mice were given broad-spectrum antibiotics to kill the majority of bacteria living in their gut. After a few weeks, the young mice had steady vascular health, but something amazing happened to the old mice.
We showed that suppressing these microbes with antibiotics restored vascular function in old mice back up to young, healthy levels. This is the very first study to show that there is a link between changes in the gut microbiome with aging and vascular dysfunction.
It is important to stress that humans should not take antibiotics to lower their risk of cardiovascular disease.
We are absolutely not saying that someone should just go out and take antibiotics. There's a bunch of side effects associated with doing that we do not want.
However, the findings from this study are promising in further exploring the link between gut biome and vascular health.
But what it does instead is it establishes the gut microbiome now as a target to be able to develop other interventions to promote health. It's been established for a while that healthy diets can promote gut microbiome health. And so that is likely the best place to start looking for interventions that we can use to target gut health as we age. For example, diets that are low in fat, low in sugar, and high in fiber have been known to be heart healthy for a long time.
As Brunt says, the fountain of youth may actually lie in the gut.
While there might not be a whole lot we can do to keep time from passing, a new study at CU Boulder has found an easy way to lower your blood pressure, and it takes just 5 minutes a day. Brainwaves' Paul Bake has the story.
What would you think if I said you could lower your blood pressure with just a daily 5-minute workout regimen? No weightlifting, no jogging, not a single step on a treadmill. All you have to do is breathe. That's right, breathe. Yeah, it sounds like an infomercial, but early evidence suggests this is possible. A new CU Boulder study found that the ultra-time-efficient exercise known as inspiratory muscle strength training, or IMST, can reduce blood pressure.
IMST stands for inspiratory muscle strength training, and it's like strength training except it's for the muscles you use to inhale. So we're trying to see, does inspiratory muscle strength training lower blood pressure, and does it improve a host of other factors?
Daniel Craighead is a postdoctoral researcher in the Integrative Physiology Department at CU Boulder. IMST was developed in the 1980s as a way to wean critically ill people off ventilators. It involves breathing in vigorously through a handheld device that provides resistance. Imagine sucking hard through a straw that sucks back. At first, people with lung diseases performed a 30-minute low-resistance regimen to boost their lung capacity. But in 2016, University of Arizona researchers wondered if just 30 inhalations a day with greater resistance would be just as effective. After 6 weeks, the results showed an unexpected side effect. Systolic blood pressure fell 12 points. That's like going from 132/80 to 120/80. And it's about double the decrease you get from aerobic exercise, and more than many medications deliver. With about half of the tests done, Craighead says researchers have found significant drops in blood pressure and improvements in large artery function among those who performed IMST, with no changes in those who used a sham breathing device that delivered low resistance.
But so far we've seen that people in our inspiratory muscle strength training group, compared to a group of sham subjects who are breathing against a low resistance, are lowering their blood pressure, they're improving their blood vessel health, their cognitive function is improving a little bit, and their exercise tolerance time is increasing. So we're hoping that by only having to do something 5 minutes a day with a handheld device, can be done in the comfort of your own home, people will perform this regularly and get health benefits they might not otherwise get.
While 30 minutes of aerobic exercise a day has clearly been shown to lower blood pressure, government estimates suggest that only about 5% of adults meet that minimum. Meanwhile, 65% of midlife adults have high systolic blood pressure.
More people might be able to get their blood pressure under control, decrease their risk for these chronic conditions, and live healthier lives.
That's it for this week's edition of Brainwaves. I'm your host, Lisa Marshall. Thanks to Andre Spelton for creating our musical introduction. Dirk Martin and Paul Bake produced today's show. Andrew Sorensen is our executive producer. If you like what you hear, like, subscribe, and share this podcast. And join us again next week when we bring you speakers fresh from the Conference on World Affairs, held right here on the campus of CU Boulder.